You ever just sit out on the porch swing, crickets chirping, fireflies blinking, and start wondering about what happens after we shuffle off this mortal coil?
Happens to the best of us. That question's been keeping folks up at night since we first gathered around a fire, I reckon.
Yeah, where does that spark of Eunice go when the lights go out? Always got me thinking.
Well, today we're going to dive into a notion that's about as mind-boggling as a twister in a wind chime factory.
A notion, huh? And what might that be?
Quantum immortality.
Quantum immortality. Now that sounds like something you'd hear whispered around a campfire late at night.
It's the idea that maybe, just maybe, consciousness doesn't just up and disappear when our bodies give out.
So you're saying that a piece of us keeps on going even after we kick the bucket.
That's the gist of it.
Yeah.
This here deep dive is inspired by an article we stumble across on allthat'sinteresting.com, written by Amber Morgan and edited by Kalina Fraga, published just yesterday, March 24th, 2025.
So we got their article and our own notes to guide us through this quantum maze.
That's right.
All right, then. Our mission, if we choose to accept it, is to unpack this whole quantum immortality thing. What does it really mean? And what kind of questions does it raise about life, death, and the great beyond?
And we ain't saying it's a gospel truth, mind you. Just trying to make sense of it all.
Exactly. Now, with something this complex, where do we even begin?
Well, we got to start with the foundation this whole notion is built on, and that's the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics.
A many worlds interpretation. Sounds like we're talking about more than just our little corner of the universe.
You got it. It all goes back to 1957, when a physicist named Hugh Everett III proposed this way of looking at things.
Listen.
Basically, every time a quantum event occurs, and these are happening all the time at the tiniest level of reality, the universe doesn't just pick one outcome. Instead, it splits, creating multiple realities, each representing a different possibility.
So, like when you're standing at a crossroads and instead of picking one path, you somehow go down both?
Exactly. The article used the example of deciding whether to go shopping. Before you make up your mind, there's the possibility of you going and the possibility of you staying home. Once you decide, reality splits. In one world, you're at the store, and in another, you're still at home. And this splitting happens with every single decision, every quantum event, leading to countless parallel worlds.
Well, that's a heap of universes to think about. So how does this tie into the idea that consciousness never truly dies?
Well, that's the crux of quantum immortality. The idea is that from your own perspective, your consciousness never actually experiences death. If a fatal event happens in one reality, your consciousness simply shifts to a parallel reality where you survived.
Hold on. Are you saying that if, say, I get struck by lightning in one world, my consciousness just hops over to a world where I dodged the bolt?
That's the theory. It's like saying there's always a version of you out there somewhere that didn't meet an untimely end.
So even if I face a life-ending event in one reality, there's another me in another reality that lived to tell the tale.
Exactly. And this idea was formalized in 1986 by a physicist named Yuan Squires. He proposed that consciousness somehow transcends these branching universes, always finding itself in a reality where death hasn't occurred.
Makes you wonder, don't it? Now, you mentioned quantum mechanics. What are some of the other quantum principles that play into this whole quantum immortality thing?
Two important concepts come to mind: Schrödinger's cat and the observer effect.
Ah, yes. Schrödinger's cat. Always loved that one. Care to refresh our memory?
Sure. It's a thought experiment that illustrates the weirdness of quantum superposition. Imagine a cat in a box with a contraption that has a 50-50 chance of releasing a deadly poison. Until you open the box, the cat is considered to be both alive and dead at the same time. It's in this fuzzy, undefined state.
Both alive and dead until we peek inside. That always felt like a real brain twister.
Now, there are different interpretations of what this means. The Copenhagen interpretation, a more traditional view, says that the act of observing the cat, of opening the box, forces the system to collapse into one state, either alive or dead. But the many worlds interpretation says something different.
Go on.
It says that when you open that box, reality splits again. In one reality, you find the cat alive, and in another, you find it dead. Both realities are equally real, just existing separately.
So in the context of quantum immortality, the me that opens the box and finds the cat alive, well, that's the reality my consciousness continues to experience.
That's the idea. Now let's talk about the observer effect. In the quantum world, simply observing a particle can change how it behaves. A famous example is the double slit experiment, where light acts like waves when unobserved, but like particles when observed.
So just looking at something can change it. How does this relate to consciousness?
Well, the thought is that consciousness can only observe itself in a living state. You can't have a conscious experience of being dead. So the only realities you'd ever be aware of are those where you're still alive. Your own awareness acts as a sort of filter, always selecting the realities where you survive.
So it's like my own consciousness is constantly observing myself, and that keeps me on the alive track even as reality splits off in other directions.
That's a simplified way of putting it.
Now, the article mentioned some pretty extreme thought experiments about this, like Russian roulette and quantum suicide.
Right. These are thought experiments designed to push the boundaries of quantum immortality and see where the logic takes us.
So walk us through those.
With Russian roulette, the idea is that if you keep playing, you would only ever experience the realities where you don't shoot yourself.
Yeah.
In the realities where you do, well, your consciousness wouldn't be around to register that.
So there'd be a whole lot of me's out there that met a grim end, but the one I'm aware of is the one that kept getting lucky.
That's the implication. And then there's Max Tegmark's quantum suicide thought experiment. Imagine a gun hooked up to a quantum particle. Depending on the state of the particle, the gun either fires or it doesn't.
Sounds dangerous.
From the perspective of the person in front of the gun, they would only ever experience the realities where the gun doesn't fire.
So they'd appear to be immortal, at least from their own point of view.
Exactly. However, it's worth noting that Tegmark himself is skeptical about the literal truth of this. These thought experiments are more about exploring the implications of the many worlds interpretation than suggesting a real-world way to cheat death.
But still, it's a fascinating thought, isn't it? But let's be honest, there's got to be some holes in this whole quantum immortality thing, right?
You're absolutely right. There are several major challenges and criticisms. For one, the theory doesn't really explain how consciousness would persist as our bodies age and decay. Eventually, our bodies just wear out.
That was my thinking, too. We ain't built to last forever. So where does consciousness go when the body just can't keep up anymore? Does it find a younger version of itself in another reality? That seems like a stretch.
That's one of the big questions. And then there's the issue of gradual loss of consciousness. Dying isn't always a sudden event. Sometimes it's a slow fade, a gradual decline.
Yeah, what happens to consciousness then? Does it just sort of dissipate?
That's another problem the theory doesn't address. And perhaps the biggest challenge of all is that there's no way to test any of this. We can't observe these supposed parallel universes or travel between them.
So it's all just speculation for now?
Essentially, yes. Even most proponents of the many worlds interpretation agree that quantum immortality, taken literally, is probably not a realistic scenario.
But even so, it's a pretty intriguing idea. Makes you wonder if death is really the end or just a transition to another reality. It kind of taps into that spiritual side of us, that desire to believe that something of us carries on.
You're right. While not a traditional spiritual concept, quantum immortality does offer a unique perspective on death, one that might resonate with those who ponder the afterlife or the soul's journey. It suggests that death, at least from our own perspective, might not be the full stop we think it is.
And that brings us to the final thought we want to leave you with. If our consciousness really does branch off into countless realities with every choice we make, every close call, every moment that passes, what does that say about the nature of our existence? And what might other versions of you be experiencing right now in those other realities? It's something to ponder, isn't it?
It really is. Maybe, just maybe, there's more to this life and what comes after than we can possibly imagine. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the strange and wonderful world of quantum immortality. Until next time, keep looking up at the stars and wondering.